This Week in Parasitism is brought to you by the American Society for Microbiology at microbeworld.org/TWiP. This Week in Parasitism, episode number 6. Today's March 17th, 2009. Hi, everybody. I'm Vincent Racaniello and Dickson Despommier. Hey.
Hello, Vince.
Do you know what today is?
St. Patty's Day.
Happy St. Patty's Day, everyone.
And to all you Irish and the people who wish you were Irish, happy St. Patty's Day.
If you aren't, you wish you were, eh?
That's right.
Dixon, we haven't done a TWiP since December of 2009.
I'm TWiP deficient.
Shall we do it more often?
We should.
All right, you got green for today.
I got green today.
Are you having corned beef tonight?
I'm a quarter Irish. We are, as a matter of fact. It's
You're quarter Irish, yeah?
I am a quarter Irish. I don't know which quarter, but I'm quarter Irish.
Well, here in New York, St. Patty's Day is a big deal, right?
It's everybody's Irish today. Everybody's Irish.
Yeah, parade, right?
That's right.
Lots of buses bring people in.
Yep, they do. And they've curtailed the drinking, but I don't know how you would do that. They try to discourage public drinking. Maybe that's how they do it. But the point is that it's a big celebration in New York City going on right now as we speak.
The point of this is...
We're not going to talk about that at all.
Parasitism.
That's right.
What do we got on the menu for today? The last thing we talked about was the nurse cell.
We did. So that was a parasite that you can catch by eating raw or undercooked meat. Okay? Particularly pork or game animals that happen to be carnivorous or scavenging. Okay, not the herbivores mostly, but the carnivores or the scavengers are the ones that can give this to you. But today we've got a completely different subject, and one which I'm sure a lot of people out there are interested in hearing about, namely the tapeworms.
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 Tapeworm.
Or cestodes, as they're formerly known as.
I thought a cestode is where the waste goes from your toilet.
No, that's a commode.
No, septic tank.
Please, Vince, let's try to
cestodes.
Let's try to be serious about this part of it. Although I did answer with open with 2 jokes.
I'm very serious.
Right.
Can we put the cestodes in
context?
Context. Now,
we can.
With my fragile understanding of eukaryotic parasites,
yes,
I remember there were the protozoa.
There are.
Such
Those are
as
single-cell
Giardia.
That's right.
Trypanosomes.
That's right. And they're all eukaryotes.
Malaria. I can't wait to talk about those.
Well, we will.
Yes, I'm sure.
We're saving the best for last, of course.
Well, there's no last. This goes on.
It's a never-ending parade.
So one of us dropped dead.
That's right. Leishmania, that's another group. Single-cell organisms.
Entamoeba, Toxoplasma. That's the cat
We have lots of wonderful stories to talk about.
Right. So those are the protozoa. Then we have the nematodes.
That's right.
And these are worms,
well,
multicellular worms.
That's right. So we have 3 different kinds of worms. Mm-hmm. We have roundworms, which are the nematodes, which we've talked a little about, but we can come back to them, of course.
And that includes trichinella.
It does. Mm-hmm. It also includes whipworm and ascaris and trichuris and lots of others.
Tracunculus,
capillaria. Most of the filarial worms are in that category. Mm-hmm. In fact, all of them. And then finally, we've got 2 other categories of worms. We've got flat segmented and flat unsegmented worms.
Okay. Are those nematodes?
No, they're not. As contrasted to the nematodes,
right,
which
nematodes
are round.
So
the flat unsegmented worms are known as flukes. Okay, or trematodes.
Trematodes.
That's right.
Okay, schistosomes, right?
Schistosomes, which happen to, of course, not be flat, but they do match all the other characteristics of the flat worms.
Such as systematics.
Yes, such is the way of systematics. There's no way to categorize everything in a particular group, but you can think in your high school biology class, you might have encountered Fasciola hepatica, which is a flat worm, very large. In fact, it looks like a big leaf. Imagine something like that chewing away on your liver.
No.
But it does happen, and people do catch it, and it's tragic when they do, because it's not often fatal, but it certainly causes
Is this why people are... A lot of what? Sorry.
Morbidity. It causes a high degree of morbidity.
Is this why people are fascinated by parasites?
I think so. Because they're almost like us. They're multicellular. They've got nervous systems. They've got digestive tracts. They've got a muscular system. They have an excretory system.
Then they turn on us.
They have a brain.
And then what are the other? You said so. These are
Those are unsegmented.
and then the segmented flatworms.
The segmented flatworms are the tapeworms that everybody is
Cestodes.
familiar with, in the sense that they can imagine what a tapeworm might look like. They're called tapeworms because it looks like a piece of tape.
Is that what the original name was? Because it looks like tape. When were they first discovered?
Oh, back in the 1600s. Everybody knew about these.
Really? Because you can see them. They're large?
Exactly.
How big?
Oh, well, we'll get to that.
Okay, sorry.
They vary in size.
You want me not to ask questions?
No, I would love you to ask questions. I just don't know the answers. No, that's not true. Of these questions, I know the answers. So tapeworms are, they exist as many types of families of tapeworms, okay? We have large families and orders of tapeworms to talk about. But the two main ones that we're going to talk about are the ones, of course, that infect humans. All right? We're going to make this anthropocentric in terms of our discussion.
But there are others that do not infect humans.
Many. In fact, almost all mammals, even cetaceans.
Why don't they infect humans? We never encounter them?
Not true.
Like a whale.
Let's think about
cestode. How could we encounter that?
What limits a parasite's host range?
Receptor binding.
Right.
It's a virus.
Well, they have nervous systems, so they can tell where they are, and if they're not in the right place, they leave. That's the simple truth of it. So
they have evolved to seek out the appropriate host.
This is correct.
And in some cases, it's humans and not.
Well,
but there are cestodes of every animal species, basically?
Basically, yes.
How about fish?
Yeah.
Sharks?
Loads.
Whales?
Loads.
All the mammals of the sea?
Tons.
Insects?
No.
How high do we go?
How low do we go?
Sorry.
How low can you go?
Well, it depends on your view.
Phylogenetically speaking, cold-blooded vertebrates, amphibians, fish, birds, of course, those are warm-blooded vertebrates.
Reptiles.
They
all have these.
They've all got
cestodes.
They've all got cestodes.
All right.
You go below that, it's hard to find an example.
What's the biggest tapeworm?
It lives in a shark, the whale shark.
Look at how quickly you answered that.
It's enormous.
It's like hundreds of feet long?
Well, not quite, but it's at least 100.
Wow.
It's big. It's very, very big. But ironically, Vince, the bigger these things are, the less harm they seem to do. So, when we talk about viruses, they're so small you need an electron microscope to see them, except for one.
Which one would that be, Dickson?
Well, it's the largest virus, and you'll know the name of that one, but I'm blocking on it right now.
It's a Mimi virus.
The Mimi virus. That's a tough name to remember. So that's the difficulty with small is that it's hard to envision these. It's not difficult to envision parasites that are multicellular. You can see them with the naked eye. So they've been known about for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. People pass these in their stool, and it writhes around, and it's got a musculature.
Can you imagine the first human to pass a tapeworm?
Or the moment that we had consciousness. I wonder what our first words were when we encountered them.
We know of them since the 1600s because that's about when Leeuwenhoek was becoming...
Leeuwenhoek, yeah.
Leeuwenhoek, but these are not submicroscopic. So.
No, they're big.
So they must have been around since Neanderthals.
Of course, they were before that. No, they're in most mammals, and they were probably in the dinosaurs also. These are very successful
Have
groups.
we sequenced any genomes?
That's an excellent question, and I don't know that answer, but you could go to GeneBank right now and find out.
Okay.
Why would we want to, first of all?
I would be very interested to know how complex it is, what kinds of genes they encode, how we place them phylogenetically in comparison with other living forms.
The only problem with this group is that they don't cause a lot of illness. Okay, these are well-adapted parasites, actually. So that for the most part, the adult tapeworms sit in your gut tract. They're all gut-dwelling adult organisms. And type out Teeniosolium. Teeniosolium might be one that I could guess has some genetic work done on it because it does cause serious health problems.
The Genome Project of Teeniosolium.
There you go.
This is a paper from 2006.
Okay.
They started to sequence it back then. But they
that's 2006. That's pretty new, right?
Oh, here's a website. The Teeniosolium Genome Project.
Yep.
Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico.
That's right. It's a big problem down there. And we'll get to that as to why it is a big problem.
All right.
All right. So it's got a very complicated genetics, I'm sure, just like all of the eukaryotes.
You ever work with a tapeworm in the lab?
To be honest with you, I have not.
Do people?
Oh, sure. I actually knew somebody who got quite famous for maintaining a tapeworm in himself so that he could have access to the segments, so he could study their physiology.
Do you need an animal to grow it in?
You do.
You can't grow it in a culture broth of some kind?
No. We don't know.
Can you grow them in mice?
The mouse tapeworms, you can, yes, sugar.
I guess that's what you could study in the laboratory.
Of course. But the human tapeworms, the ones we'll be discussing in a moment, are large enough so that you can actually do studies on the individual segments.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so...
All right, let's go.
When I say segments, these worms are the...
Are you going to describe?
I'm going to give the whole schmear.
Schmear.
And then I would like to read a story to our listeners, a story that I wrote, yes, about tapeworms, to show you how they play a role in human biology and in wildlife biology as well. But let's begin with a general classification and discussion of tapeworms. First of all, let me dispel any rumors and mythologies associated with tapeworms.
Aww.
Number one, if you have a tapeworm, it doesn't mean that you are always hungry. Number two, if you have a tapeworm, it doesn't mean that it will help you lose weight. Neither one of those things is true. Mm-hmm. In fact, they require very little from the host, and that's why they're benignly located in our small and large intestine, the same worm. Now think of how long our intestinal tract is, and the same worm can occupy both of those zones.
How does it stay in there? Does it grab on the side?
I will tell you everything, Vince. I'll give you everything.
And you don't even know it's there?
You don't even know it's there unless the segments come out, and you see them in your own stool, which happens frequently, but a lot of people don't notice that sort of thing. So they don't like looking backwards. They only like looking forwards. So they often don't encounter their parasites that way. So of the groups of tapeworms, and I've brought another reference book with me, besides the textbook that I helped co-author, because in this particular book, which is called Foundations of Parasitology, by Gerald Schmidt and Larry Roberts, and I believe that there's a newer edition, but the classification hasn't changed. Larry Roberts is one of the great experts on tapeworms, and so he wrote this chapter on tapeworms, and so I trust the science that's represented here. So what we've got is two major orders to discuss of tapeworms. One is called Pseudophylidia, and the other order is called, and because I'm not a classification oriented person, is called Cyclophyllidia.
These are both human tapeworms?
They can't, no, these are groups of tapeworms.
And they can have
they're
humans.
Found all the way throughout the animal kingdom, including us. We have examples in us of both of these kinds of tapeworms, which is why I mentioned them. So their life cycles are either simple or complicated, depending on whether they're pseudophylidian tapeworms or cyclophyllidian tapeworms. The cyclophyllidian tapeworms include the beef tapeworm and the pork tapeworm. And in fact, the dog tapeworm.
So-called because that is their host.
That is
their normal host.
That is correct. So the adult tapeworm, this creates a problem here. There's a semantic problem here because we've named the first two parasites based on how we catch them.
Which first two are you talking about? The ones we've discussed?
The beef tapeworm and the pork tapeworm.
Yes.
So the beef tapeworm.
But not the dog tapeworm.
But not the dog, exactly. So.
Well, it's in their host. Isn't beef and dogs and aren't cows, pigs, and dogs the natural host? Isn't that how they were named?
The answer is yes and no.
Okay. They live in other hosts as well.
They do. All of these parasites, all of the tapeworm parasites require an intermediate host. Every one of them. Every single one requires a complicated biological process.
We'll hear about, I presume, today.
Right now.
Right.
We can talk about it right now. So let's talk first about the cyclophyllidian tapeworms.
Okay.
Cyclophyllidian.
This is the complex or the simple one?
This turns out to be the simple one.
Good.
But even simple is complicated.
Okay, let's do that. Cyclophyllia. Give me a species name.
Teenia saginata.
Okay, I'm looking in your textbook.
You are.
And I suggest this is not an expensive book.
Oh, it's pretty cheap.
You should buy it and follow along. We're on page 176.
Right, of the 5th edition.
5th edition, and it's called Teenia saginata.
That's right.
What is this? Goetze in 1782. That's when it was first
discovered it.
1782.
That's right. That's right.
Go for it, Dickson.
What is it? It's a large organism that lives inside of our gut tract in the small and large intestine, because the worm is so long that it will actually have segments in the large intestine as well, connected all together.
How many feet are we talking about here?
20 to 25 feet sometimes. Huge. Enormous. And yet...
It doesn't start out that big.
No, of course not.
How many years does it take to get that big?
No, it's months. It's about 3 to 4 months,
so
and it can grow to full size.
20 to 25 feet. Okay.
From almost a microscopic, not quite microscopic, cyst that you ingest. Okay. So the first thing to do is, you want to talk about the anatomy of this thing first?
Sure, let's do that.
All right, fine. So the tapeworm itself, the adult, let's talk about the adult tapeworm.
That's what's in your intestine.
And why do I say adult? Because it means that there's another stage too.
A young.
Juvenile. It's not the larva, it's called the juvenile tapeworm. Okay. So let's talk about the adult first. All of the adult tapeworms, bar none, live in the gut tract of their hosts. Okay?
Not in the brain.
Well, we'll get to that. The adult
forms.
The adult forms.
The long worms.
The long worms,
live
the big
in the gut.
Except for the dog tapeworm, of course, because that's a short one.
So if there weren't animals with intestines, these worms wouldn't exist.
They would not exist.
They've adapted to grow in these nice, hospitable places.
Absolutely correct.
The adults live in the intestine.
The adults live in the intestine, and they consist of 4 different parts. But they're all connected together. So what you're really looking at is not an individual worm. You're looking at a colony of worms, all connected together. It's kind of a puzzle that you have to look at. And you can say, well, it has a head, okay? It has a germinal region, which is called the neck region. And then it has segments. And the segments are of 3 different kinds. You have immature, mature, and gravid. Gravid means egg-laying.
Gravid means egg. Do we have a picture?
We do. There's a picture there of the gravid proglottid. I must tell you that the segment of each tapeworm is referred to as a proglottid.
Is this a segment?
It is.
Oh.
Single segment.
This is where the eggs are kept.
That's correct. This is an egg machine. What you're looking at here is an egg machine. All right?
Where would this gravid proglottid be in the whole worm? At the tail?
At the absolute end.
The 3' end?
The 3' end, exactly. The 5' end is the head, and the 3' end is the tail. That's exactly the way to put it.
You should draw a picture with the 5
And they can snap back on each other, too. They can. As a matter of fact, that's how it mates. So,
mates with itself?
It's got male and female sex organs built into each proglottid. It makes
dating easy.
It makes dating very simple. You just mate with the adjacent segment if you can get close enough to do that. It's got, inside of every segment, it has musculature. It has an excretory pore, an excretory canal on both sides to take care of the wastes. But it's missing something. What do you think it's missing, Vince?
Reproductive system.
No, it's got tons of that stuff.
Each segment has a reproductive
Tons
system.
of it. Male and female
organs.
organs.
You said the gravid proglottid was at the 3' end.
It is, but this thing, if you were a developmental biologist, you would love tapeworms because you can start at the head and end at the tail and find all of the developmental sequences from one end to the other.
So if you took a segment, could you put it in another animal and it would grow into a full worm?
No, of course not.
No?
That's not how this works. That's too bad, but it doesn't work.
All right, so what's missing in each segment? A brain?
It has a nervous system.
Runs through each segment? Yep. But you're saying the segments don't communicate with each other.
They do. They actually do. They coordinate. The muscular coordination is actually...
So I don't know what's missing.
It doesn't have a gut tract.
Oh, yes, of course. Each one has its own system, but there's not a tube that passes through all
That
of
is
them.
correct.
Right.
But nematodes have a gut tract.
Yeah, Racaniello does, right?
All the other nematodes also. So the tapeworms have no gut tracts.
But each segment does it,
They're
right?
called gutless wonders. They are.
They make up for it by living in a gut.
Well, they're better at it than you think, because if you look at the surface of our gut under an electron microscope, what do you see?
Ruffles and ridges.
Ruffles and ridges.
Right.
It's like the Lay's potato chips.
Yeah, you see all villi with lots of microvilli, lots of nice places to hang out, right?
And tons of absorption surface.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at the surface of each of these proglottids, guess what?
It looks the same.
It does.
Absorptive and excretory surfaces.
Almost indistinguishable.
That's what I'm looking at this picture here?
Yeah. But you can't see it with your naked eye. You need an electron microscope to see it.
I see.
So the surface of this worm is referred to as the tegument.
Mm-hmm.
And the tegument is a metabolically active surface. It has active transport sites. It has driven by ATP. And ATPase plays a huge role in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So, and these segments are active. They move. Okay? Not only
What do you mean
that,
they move?
They move. They can
change
contract.
their position in the
Yeah,
worm?
if you had an individual segment on this table that we're talking at right now,
it could move.
It'll crawl right across the table for you.
They don't switch position in the worm.
They do not.
But there is a head, right?
Yep. It's called the scolex.
So it's a specialized organ.
Very specialized.
Different from all the other segments. But it can do all the things the other segments can do?
No, it can't reproduce.
What is its role? Just to hang on?
It hangs on. It does one more thing. This is a unique thing. It senses the presence of food.
Mm-hmm.
And as the meal is being digested by you, the tapeworm hangs tough, and it hangs right up at the pyloric valve, right at the top of the stomach.
Right.
And it gets all that nutrition, and it puts as much of the generative section, the neck region of this worm, in touch with as much pre-digested food as you can make for it. As the meal ends, as you push yourself away from the table after that third porterhouse steak. No, we wouldn't do that. But, let's say you've had your full and you're ready to go take a nap. This worm is still very, very concerned about its role in your body. So what it does is it detaches itself. And it follows the pre-digested meal down your small intestine until it gets uncomfortable for the worm. And that might be 3 or 4 feet down. By that time, you've absorbed most of your meal.
Why is it uncomfortable for the worm?
Because it's starting to encounter a different pH.
Yeah, it doesn't want to get too far from the stomach,
That's
right?
correct.
Can it get back up there later?
Absolutely.
Of course, if it moved down further, then it would start coming out your
Well, it does anyway. But the fact is that this worm can travel down with the meal until it's all digested and absorbed by you. Yeah. It takes what it needs first, of course. And then it just slowly crawls its way back up to where it was to begin with, and it's ready for the next meal.
So it seems to me that it would mostly want to be in the small intestine. The large intestine is just water reabsorption, no?
Correct.
Doesn't get many nutrients. But there is a part of the worm in there, though.
Well, it's long enough to stretch that far. I won't say that it...
And how did those last segments get nutrients?
They don't. They don't have to, you see, because at that point they're ready to break off and leave.
Really?
Really?
Is that how this works?
Yes.
The segments move down, so new ones grow at the neck.
That's correct.
And then they get pushed down, they break off.
Exactly.
And what's the fate of those? They come out
into the feces.
And then?
And then they dissolve.
That's it. Their life's over?
And their life is over. And they release their eggs.
Oh, there are eggs in each segment.
There are millions.
No, in the last one only.
Yeah.
The gravid.
No. There might be 20 gravid segments.
Oh, I see. Okay. And there are eggs in them.
And there are hundreds of segments altogether.
Sounds to me like a reproductive strategy.
It
Dickson.
is an egg factory.
And who eats feces, Dickson?
Ew.
No one.
Well, that's not true, actually.
Yeah, dogs. I've seen dogs.
I know that, but they do this inadvertently.
Dogs do?
No. The cow does. The cow inadvertently ingests the eggs from a human tapeworm. Now, think of the relationship that had to occur here. This is, how old are we as a species? Just 200,000 years old, right? How old are cows? They're much older.
Much older. Yeah.
So I wonder who the definitive host, definitive means where the sexual reproductive stages are.
I would say cow, right?
No, the cow gets the eggs. I didn't tell you what happens. After the cow eats the eggs, something bad happens to the cow.
So the cow is not eating its own produced eggs.
No.
It's eating eggs produced in a human.
That's correct. You're absolutely right.
But cows predate humans.
That's right. So that must have meant that there were either another hominid prior to us.
Or another species.
We're 3 million years old as a species, as a hominid.
Yes.
Okay, so that could take us back 3 million. But before that, there were primates. So the primates probably had these tapeworms as well. And the tapeworms have evolved with us throughout our evolutionary history.
So let me clarify. I think we have to...
Well, we're not finished with the cycle yet.
But I want to know, when the human excretes... We are talking about a human here.
We are.
When the eggs go in the feces, what's the fate of them?
I'm going to tell you that right now. In fact, I will tell you first that only human beings can harbor the adult. Only. It is specific to humans.
This doesn't happen in a cow.
No, but we need a cow.
All right. Well, tell me first what happens to the eggs that we excrete.
The eggs are excreted in the segments.
Right. The segments dissolve.
Segments eventually die in the fecal deposit in soil. Now, this is an
soil. I don't excrete into soil.
No, you don't. But this is a wonderful segue. WHO just published their findings on how many people defecate in the environment versus how many people have access to sanitary facilities. You want to guess?
Yeah, I would guess that 80% of the world's population defecates into the soil.
No, that's a big estimate, Vince.
Well, I was just taking a guess.
I know.
What is it?
You're off.
20%?
Well, it's 1 in 6. It's 1 billion people.
All right.
1 billion people do not have access to toilets. You know what that means? It places the other 5 billion at risk from the parasites that are transmitted from person to person by fecal contamination.
Even here in the U.S.?
Even here in the U.S.
How would I get a
immigrant population?
How would I get infected with an egg in the soil from fecal matter?
If you're a small child, it's called pica.
What's pica?
You know pica?
No.
Oh, you see, you can include this into your vocabulary. Pica is a
P-I-C-A?
Pica is a behavior pattern that every child goes through of putting things in their mouth to detect their environment and to learn about their world.
Mm-hmm.
So they start when they're 1 day old, and they continue until they're about 5 or 6. And some of us, you can see us still with the ends of our glasses and pencils in our mouths. We're still a cigarette. All of this is pica-like behavior. So a small child is a perfect victim for this, right?
So if they're outside, they can...
That's right. But the egg of this parasite, if you swallowed it, nothing would happen. Why do you suppose that is?
You would pass out again?
Yeah.
It doesn't want me. It wants a cow.
How does it know the difference? This raises a very important...
Well, there are many ways it could detect the difference. There are chemical differences, microflora differences.
Think of a cow and a human being and compare their digestive tracts, and you'll get your answer.
Cow has many stomachs, right?
A ruminant. It's a ruminant, right. So it has 3 different stomachs. One is called the abomosum. And the egg has to undergo pH changes in order to hatch. Wait a minute, to hatch? The egg hatches? You should say, Dick. Wait a minute, the egg hatches?
The baby is out in the field and he eats eggs, but you're telling me nothing's going to happen to that
Nothing
baby.
Will happen to that baby.
Those eggs will pass through.
That's right. But a cow...
How often do people encounter cows, Dickson?
If I tell you that this is an endemic disease to the entire West African
I can imagine. There are lots of cows and people nearby.
That's right. If I tell you that there's a lot of this infection in Mexico
and
in Central America, if I tell you that, you'll understand.
Give me a scenario of how we can get the eggs back into a cow, and then how does it get into people? We have to eat the cow meat? Is that the idea?
That's correct. You have to eat rare or undercooked steak.
So the babies doing pica are fine.
They're doing fine for this particular parasite.
Yes, that's fine. But how does a cow get infected with human eggs?
By encountering human feces in their diet.
Is that typical?
Not in this country.
But in Africa, Mexico...
Mexico, I can tell you what the rate of failure of cattle in inspection is for this parasite. Okay?
Can you see this?
Because we do a cheek muscle cut. Because let me tell you what happens to the egg once it gets into the cow. So let me just summarize for our listeners what's happened so far. We have an enormous tapeworm sitting in our gut tract. It can, by the way, live for a very long time. How long? They haven't found aging genes for these parasites. I can tell you.
Telomeres?
Well, they don't have something, because you can transfer mouse equivalent parasites from mouse to mouse to mouse to mouse to mouse to mouse to mouse. And the parasite stays alive. These don't have to have aging genes. You know why? Because we do. When we die, they die.
They do die, really?
Oh, yeah, but if you... they'll only die if you do.
Huh? The eggs will fall on the ground and be...
The adult parasite has no definable lifespan.
Interesting. So as long as it's in us, it has our lifespan, basically.
Right.
Are there parasites in elephants like this, tapeworms, so they can live as long as the elephant?
Yes, and if you do serial transfers of the adult from person to person, which they don't.
They could
but you
live
can do
a
the
long
same
time,
in mouse.
yeah.
They live forever, basically forever.
So these need your nutrients, and as soon as you stop providing them, they die.
Also means that there's no immunity against this stage.
So who is the reservoir of the tapeworm, the human or the cow?
Well, there's no reservoir. None. The definition of a reservoir is another animal that harbors the same stage.
No, there's none then. So what is the intermediate host for this worm?
The cow.
The cow is, and we're the end host? The adult is in there.
We are.
So by
we
definition.
are the definitive host, and they are the intermediate host. Now,
can you explain to me how cows encounter human fecal contamination?
Sure, it's not a problem.
Okay.
Let's say you're a cowboy.
Okay.
I'm not joking.
All right.
Let's say you're a cattle herder.
Right.
And you're in the middle of the African veldt.
And you go to the bathroom. Yeah.
Of course.
And the cows walk on it and get contaminated.
Yeah, they don't care.
So they eat the eggs, and then what happens?
And then what happens?
Good. They know it's a cow because there are 5 stomachs, and they have different chemical environments.
They receive what are known as environmental cues.
Right.
And these environmental cues are set up sequentially to trigger the stimulation of hatching enzymes. Huh.
And if
these are proteases.
If this was not a cow, if it were a human, none of this would happen. The eggs would just go through.
With this particular parasite, nothing happens. The eggs, you encounter your own eggs, they go right on through your gut tract.
Okay, so cues.
We have another one to talk about after this, though, that's different.
Yeah, we may need another session.
No, we're doing fine here.
Okay. We have 8 hours.
We could make this 2 TWiPs. 2 TWiPs are better than 1. So the egg, as it hatches in the now small intestine of the cow.
Hold on, we need to see a cow because I got to see this.
Just go to the cow.
I'm going to put cow in. What should I put? Cow digestive tract.
Sure.
Digestive system, and let's look at a picture.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so we have a mouth, then we have an esophagus.
We do.
Which goes to the rumen. Which is a big thing with many stomachs.
That's
and then
correct.
Out of the rumen, you have the small intestine.
You do.
A large intestine, and then
the anus.
Out.
Right.
Okay. So you're saying it passes through the rumen, and it gets these cues. Does it do something to the egg in the rumen?
It does. It stimulates the production of an enzyme.
Okay.
The enzyme is a protease. The protease allows the larva, which is sitting inside, the larva, to digest its way through the eggshell. Now, where does that occur? It occurs in the small intestine.
All right, so no digestion in the rumen, but production of enzymes starts to happen.
The pH of the rumen allows the egg to receive the proper environmental cues, which stimulates the production of the enzyme, which then allows it to hatch.
And that happens in the intestine.
Yes.
So now we have a...
Now you have something called a hexacanth larva. Hexacanth, meaning it's got 6 teeth. And this is a little burrowing machine.
Do we have a picture here?
We do. It's right here.
A hexacanth larva.
It's inside of each egg.
I see.
And these larvae, here's what they do, Vince. I'll illustrate with my hands. Let's say these are the 6 hooks, and they're like this, and they gnaw their way and gnaw their way and
out of the egg.
Out of the egg. No, they digest their way out of the egg.
Yes.
They penetrate the small intestinal wall.
Okay.
And they're so small that they can get into the blood supply of the cow through the mesenteric venules.
Mm-hmm.
And once they're in the mesenteric venules, they can then go to various parts of the cow's body.
All right.
And they do. And they go all over the cow.
All over?
Everywhere.
Not just muscle?
Not just muscle. What if this cow ingests 1,000 eggs? My guess is that they will have the resulting stage that this larva transitions into.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in their brain, in their muscles, in their heart, in their kidneys, lungs, liver, all over their bodies.
What if you ingest 1 egg? Is that enough to
the
start?
Cow?
Yeah, the cow.
Yeah, you'll get one
somewhere.
Juvenile. You'll get what results from the larva is the juvenile.
It's stochastic. It's random wherever it lands, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So once it's in the tissue of the cow, it then transforms to the next stage.
So it picks up another cue from being in the tissue.
See how fantastic this
turns into another stage, which is
called the juvenile.
Right. So it still has these little.
Nope.
What do you call these?
Hexacanths. It loses those teeth.
All right.
And it now takes on some of the characteristics of the adult.
Okay.
It develops 4 suckers. Okay, on a protohead or protoscolex, and it sits inside of this little thing called a bladder.
Okay.
That it creates for itself. And it secretes anti-inflammatory compounds, which keeps the immune system from actually killing it. It's amazing. It's a fantastic voyage, basically. So this parasite starts out as an adult in our gut tract. The eggs exit in a proglottid. The proglottid dissolves, releases the eggs. The eggs are ingested by the cow. The eggs pass through the intestinal tract of the cow until it gets to the small intestine. They then are stimulated to hatch. They get into the blood supply, distribute throughout the body, and in weeks, once they're in the tissue, transforms from the hexacant's larva to the infectious juvenile stage. Now, you're going to have to ask me, how in the world can we possibly catch this parasite? By eating beef.
It has to be undercooked or raw beef.
Which is why I have a picture of beef Wellington in my book.
Now, if you freeze the beef, will it kill them?
It will.
As will it also kill, freezing pork will kill trichinella, right?
That's correct. In fact, freezing pork will kill toxoplasma also.
All right. So if we undercook our beef, now in the U.S., do we have to worry about this?
No.
How do we check our meat for it?
It's inspected at the United States Department of Agriculture. It's a required test.
Wait a minute. So you have many cattle farms in the country. So how are all the cows inspected?
Well, they're first slaughtered, and then their hides are removed.
Yes.
And before they're chopped up into pieces, they do a cut down on the cheeks.
I see.
And what are they looking for? They're looking for the juvenile.
Cysticercosis.
Cysticercosis. They're looking for the Cysticercosis.
How do they look under the microscope?
No, it's visible with the naked eye. It's about the size of a Lesueur pea.
But what if it's not in the cheek? What if it's in some other muscle?
Then you lose.
Really?
Yeah, that's right. All they're looking for are the heavy infected cattle.
And that's all that matters?
I would say no, that's not all that matters, because you can have a lightly infected cow that can transmit this infection to some
every
people too.
Piece of beef made in the U.S. is inspected this way?
Of course not.
So do we have tapeworms in the U.S.?
We do, but not many, because we have sanitary conditions in the United States that prevents human feces from contaminating the environment. So
that would seem the best preventive, is to keep the human feces out of the cow pasture.
That's right. So knowing which cows have this and where they come from tells you something about our meat industry.
Tell me.
I will.
What's the source of the cows for the beef industry?
That's a very good question.
Are they American?
Do we eat our own beef, or do we export beef and then buy beef from another place that's cheaper than it is?
I would guess that's what we do.
Yeah, well, in most cases, what happens here is that we can get a better price for our beef abroad in some countries than the beef that we can buy from places like Argentina and Mexico.
Uh-huh.
Now, the beef from Argentina is pristine. The sanitary conditions down there are excellent, so we don't have to worry about it. I was just there. But if you go to Mexico, that's a problem.
So how do I know where my beef is from in the supermarket?
Well, you don't.
Where's the beef from?
You will not know where your beef is from. There's no way to know.
No way to know?
And in fact, every time there's an 0157 outbreak of E. coli,
yes,
they look back at the meat packer, and there's about 200 different cows in each beef patty. So they came from all over the place. Yeah. You don't have a tracer device that tells you where this comes from. But every year, about 20 to 40,000 head of cattle are condemned from Mexico. And you'd say, what the heck are we doing?
Wait a minute. How do they condemn them? The USDA inspects them?
They do.
So they come in whole without skin?
No. They come in as cattle. They're actually bought as live cattle.
Really? So they import them as live cattle?
That's correct.
I see. Okay.
Because it's cheaper.
Why don't we just buy them from Africa, Dick?
If we did, of course, then they'd all be contaminated.
So even with this rejection rate, it's still cheaper to get them from Mexico than...
26,000 head of cattle. Do you know how many cattle we eat a year?
I have no idea.
It's unbelievable numbers.
300 million people.
You could look it up online. It's like millions of head of cattle.
How many cattle we eat each year?
Yeah.
Cattle
consumption USA.
Wow, you have the right you have the right query here.
Right.
Oh my gosh, there's actually numbers.
Tell us the numbers.
See what year we
Tell us the number.
There are 1.3 billion head of cattle in the world. We have in the U.S. You know who's the biggest producer of cattle? India. Well, they don't kill them, right?
That's correct.
They have 281 million.
Yeah, they're all over the place.
Brazil is 187, China 139, that's U.S. 96 million, Argentina 51 million. Mexico doesn't actually make the top.
No, but they do import cattle to the United States.
I don't know what the numbers are. I couldn't find it quickly. I do know that we also import from Canada, apparently.
But not anymore.
Because of the BSE business in Canada.
That's
all right,
correct.
so
we just had another case of it, by the way, in Alberta.
All right, really?
Yeah.
All right. So
millions of head of cattle. So you know who
got it.
do you know who produces the most cattle in the United States?
Jane Fonda's husband. What's his name?
Ted Turner.
Ted Turner? No.
No, which state produces the most cattle?
I have no idea.
Yeah, you can guess. Come on. I'll give you a hint.
Wait a minute. Wait.
It's
Wyoming?
No.
Kansas.
What's the biggest state?
Texas.
Thank you.
I'm such an idiot.
Wait, but I bet you never guessed the second.
Dick, I know about viruses.
I know.
Sorry, what's
I'm
the
proud
biggest?
of you.
The second biggest?
What's the second biggest cattle producer in the United States?
Oklahoma.
Well, no. Which state would you guess if you didn't
California.
know?
No.
Or
Oregon.
how about Montana?
My Big Sky.
Big Sky. It's a big state. It's huge.
Are you
it's
coming
flat.
to me with this summer to Montana?
I'd love to. Yeah, you're going to be at Bozeman. I'll be there.
Can you come?
There. Sure. I'll be there anyway.
We could do a TWiP. We're going to do a TWiP if you were with me. That would be great.
I'll be with you, and in fact,
all right. We'll take me fishing for a day, and we'll
more
film
than
it.
that. We'll go down the Yellowstone River. So, but you have to tell me what the second largest cattle producing state in the United States is.
All right.
Texas is number one. No, without looking, just by guessing.
No, I'm not going to look at the statistics. I'm going to look at a map of the U.S. because I have trouble visualizing. It's such a big country.
You wouldn't have trouble here.
All right, so Texas is the biggest. You said Montana was next.
No, I didn't. But everybody would think.
No, I think there's not enough grazing area there, is there?
Yeah, there is. Huge amount of grazing.
How about Arkansas? No. Well, there's no point in me guessing. What is it?
It's Florida.
You're kidding.
See? I knew you'd say that.
There's just retired people in Florida.
Not in the Panhandle.
No?
No. And that's
is that where the cows are?
That's where Rich is, too.
Yeah, Rich is in Gainesville. Is that in the Panhandle?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if Rich listens to TWiP. Sorry.
He probably doesn't, but he knows that Florida is the second largest cattle producer.
Let's see.
And what do they eat?
Gainesville is not in the Panhandle, dude. It's right here.
I know where it is. What do they eat, though? It's almost in the Panhandle.
What do cows eat?
Yeah, in Florida.
Grass?
And?
Grain.
No. They eat the leftovers from sugarcane.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that? That's what they feed them?
Yeah. So there's a sugarcane cattle industry in Florida that's huge.
Interesting.
Okay, the point is
I've lost the point of this conversation.
Well, you have to know where your cows come from in order to know whether you're at risk or not from this particular parasite.
Well, you're saying all our cows go out, right?
Every one of them.
Nothing stays here.
I don't think so.
So I can assume that whatever beef I buy in the market is not made in the U.S.
Well, some of it might be, but we
all right,
import a lot of beef from Costa Rica.
So we have to make sure we inspect it to get rid of it. So have there been any outbreaks of tapeworm in the U.S.?
Not many.
Do people come to the hospital with tapeworm?
Not really.
And when did we get rid of it? Was there a time in the U.S. when we had a tapeworm?
When we sanitized.
What year would that be?
Well, back in the teens.
20th century. Early 20th century.
Yeah, as soon as the outhouse came into vogue, things improved dramatically, and this was one of those things.
Now,
I'm just using this parasite as an example of a tapeworm. I'm not saying that this is a major health risk.
Right.
I'm giving you the basic
Well, not in
biology.
the U.S., but in other countries you're saying
it's not a health risk anywhere.
Do people have them?
Yeah.
All right, so it doesn't make you ill.
Tons. That's correct. It just takes a little bit of what you eat and turns it into a 30-foot worm.
How much does this 30-foot worm weigh, Dickson?
Not much.
5 pounds?
It doesn't even come close to that. It's not a heavy animal. But it's a colony of animals, each one of these segments. Sure. Okay, so you've got the basic life cycle then. The adult lives in humans. The larva infects cattle and develops to the juvenile, and that lives in cattle. And we eat raw meat, or undercooked, not frozen, and we catch the adult. That's the cycle.
So would you not eat raw or undercooked beef in the United States, Dickson?
I would freeze it first.
Really? Is all the beef frozen that we buy in the supermarket?
No
Not
way.
Necessarily?
No. And it doesn't kill off the prions, and it doesn't kill off the toxin from 0157. All right, but it does kill off all.
If you did have a tapeworm, how would you know it?
Okay, great question. These segments at the end, the gravid segments, they break off and they actually spontaneously leave the host.
What do they look like, the segment?
They're white, flaccid segments. Here's a picture of them in small.
About an inch long?
Yeah, each one is about an inch to an inch and a half.
So would you notice this in your feces?
You'd notice it in your bed clothing if you woke up and there they were.
Oh, they come out on their own?
They come out on their own.
Not just when you defecate.
That's correct.
Oh, man.
I know, they're pretty disgusting little animals, actually.
So you would notice this and go in, and then you went to the doctor, and they say, hey, you have a tapeworm, which we found by X-ray. Is that how you would see it?
No.
No?
No. If the doctor says, you've found these segments in your stool, is
Yes.
that right, or you're in your bedclothes?
Yes.
You'll usually bring these segments in to a doctor, and the doctor will then
Yeah.
freak out because they've never seen these before either.
They're not Josh, though.
They're not. No. Josh Stillman would instantly recognize what they are, right? And what you do is you take them down to the lab. So now what do?
Did you ever see these segments when you worked in the lab?
Many times.
Oh, okay.
Many times.
So you
in the
look
old
at them
days,
under-
you can catch these by traveling to other countries and eating their beef. The best one I ever saw was a woman who had 7 of them.
7 worms.
7 tapeworms.
That could obstruct, right?
Well, even then, no. But
No.
these were shorter because they were all competing for the same resources, right?
Wow.
Now, you could have eaten 20 cysts. You'll only end up with 1 worm.
Mm-hmm.
So one outcompetes the others normally.
How did you get 7? 7 different infections?
I have no idea. No. These were probably acquired at the same meal. And she liked her beef raw.
Oh, man.
I know. So steak tartare is a big offender for this.
So if you go to Africa, don't eat steak tartare.
Stay away from it. Or
Mexico,
freeze
too.
it.
Or freeze it. If you have a freezer, you may not have a freezer.
You don't have a freezer.
So you go to your physician, you say, found these segments. What's the physician going to do?
Well, if the physician is knowledgeable, or if he has access or her to a good lab, then the segments are examined by a technician. And so how do you examine a segment? Go back a couple of pages. So here, this is not the natural color for a segment. It's white.
Mm-hmm.
How did
You
it get
stained
all
it.
that black stuff
They must
inside?
have stained it.
No, we didn't. We injected the central uterus with India ink.
I see. Is that
Using-
a diagnostic stain?
Yeah, using it's not a stain. It's just we just filled up
Yeah.
all of the egg passages. Okay?
But you could tell this is a worm segment. What do you have to do that for?
Because you have to say which one.
Oh, that matters.
It does matter, and I'll tell you why.
Which
because
ones can we get infected with?
You can get infected with all of them, but some
Cow,
are more benign than others.
pork.
Let's just talk about those two. All right?
Those are the most common.
And people, when they hear about tapeworms, they say, tapeworm, a big deal. They can be a big deal, and I'll tell you why. This one's not a big deal, but you have
Cow
to
tapeworm,
know
okay.
that this is the cow tapeworm and not the pork.
Wait a minute. Why is it
tapeworm.
cow tapeworm? We're the
That's
final
right.
host.
This should be called the human tapeworm, right?
That's right.
Except we have so many. Which one would you call the human tapeworm?
Because they come from different species. So the pig tapeworm, pork tapeworm is the same thing. We have the adult in us.
Correct.
All right. So
Correct.
those are the 2 main ones that we see in people.
They are.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have others that we can talk about.
So you want to
later.
know which kind of tapeworm it is to treat
You want
it.
to know which one it is, because if you don't,
Yes.
you're placing other people at risk from acquiring something even worse than knowing that you have a big worm living in your small intestine.
Which would be.
We'll get to that.
All right.
I want to save that for the next one.
So
So now you have the diagnosis.
How can you tell whether the kind of tapeworm it is by putting India ink in it?
Aha! Thank you. Why is that the diagnostic test?
Yes.
Because if you notice, it's got a central uterus
Yes.
and these side branches to the uterus. Okay? Now, with Teenia saginata, there are more than 12 side branches per side.
Yeah.
Many more.
There are.
I don't mean at the ends over here. I mean right down here. If
with
you
the
just
main
count
trunk,
this,
yeah.
if you just cover half of it, you've got 12 already. And then if it exceeds 15, you're sure that this is Teenia saginata.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's no further health risk to either the technician doing the diagnosis or to the patient with the adult tapeworm.
Okay. So you don't get treated?
You do get treated, sure. I want to get treated.
What do you get treated
Get rid
with?
of it. Well, there are several drugs that you can get treated with.
Okay.
One of them is praziquantel.
And then what does that do to the worm? It kills it?
Yeah, it does,
Is
actually.
it toxic for us?
No, it's not. In fact, it inhibits invertebrate calcium ion channels.
Okay. So then the worm dies within you
It does.
and passes out?
No. The problem with that is that it kills the worm in situ, and your digestive enzymes digest it, and you never see the results of whether you were completely cured or not. So you don't know if you were cured. You just don't. You stop passing segments, but you're not sure that you got the head.
Couldn't you take an X-ray?
These things are transparent. They don't show up.
Put some India ink in them. No, okay. So what else can you do that would have the worm come out?
You can give a different drug.
It would kill it. It would slide out.
It paralyzes the worm, but it doesn't kill it.
I see. What's that drug called?
Well, those are old drugs. There's one called Adabrin. Adabrin, if you go back to World War II, was the drug of choice for malaria. Interesting,
So
right?
supposedly my father had a tapeworm in Italy in the 40s
Yeah.
when he was a medical student, and he took a drug and it came out.
Interesting.
He said it was very long.
Right. Oh, your father had a tapeworm.
Yes.
Interesting.
Why is that interesting?
I think it's very interesting.
It's
You didn't
Italy.
have a tapeworm, did you?
Italy's in the 40s.
Yeah.
No, I'm sure it was contaminated meat, right?
There you go. It had to be.
Yeah.
Imagine what the conditions were like during the Second World War, and you'll figure it out.
He was a medical student, so I suppose he knew what was going on. But I don't know.
Should have.
Well, he got treated, so maybe he passed some segments. Yeah.
But when I was a technician here back in 1962,
Right.
they were still using the old drug, which was called aspidium. Now, aspidium is a drug derived from the male fern plant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, ferns are of two different kinds, right? Males and females.
Okay.
The male fern plant contains a very active substance in its spore,
right,
which you can extract, and it irritates the hell out of this worm without killing it.
So let's go.
Yeah, so the reason why I knew this woman had 7 tapeworms from her travels in Turkey was because I was the technician in charge of collecting the tapeworms and bringing them back to the lab for diagnosis.
So you gave her aspidium.
I didn't, but the doctor did.
And you went to her house?
No, she was in the hospital.
And every time she had a BM,
No, she never had a BM. She was absolutely clean. And then the aspidium was actually lowered into her small intestine by an NG tube.
Oh, my gosh.
You know what an NG stands for?
Nasogastric tube.
Thank you. And the aspidium is then put right almost on the worm itself.
Well, this is some procedure.
It's a choreographed procedure. That's correct.
Wow.
And then the worm is totally freaked out by this experience, loses its ability to hang on to the host, and out it comes. And then you collect it because you purge the patient.
So you collected all 7 worms.
I was responsible for collecting these worms in a bedpan of all things.
Yeah. Then you brought them back?
And there they were, and I covered the whole thing over with a cloth towel and rushed back to another building on the corner of 168th Street and Broadway, where our labs used to be, and they took this bedpan and they filled it with saline, emptied it, and out came these worms in a large porcelain dish. And then we sat and we tried to separate out the worms, and we had an aha moment. One of the doctors, Dr. Kathleen Hussey, who was at that time employed by Columbia University, a PhD from the University of Michigan, a wonderful lady who taught me a lot about my early days in parasitology. She says, "Oh, we got so lucky. There's the Scolex." It was right on the edge of the bedpan. Mm-hmm. It was like nature had arranged it for us.
Well, there should have been 7 Scolex.
Well, you just spoiled the story because we took this one and we started to take the worm and put it into another container, and there was, a lot of the worms still left when we finished taking out this particular parasite. And then someone else said, "Wait, there's another Scolex." 2 tapeworms, wow. And so we took the second one out and put that in a separate jar. And then there was a third and a fourth and 7.
You were freaked out, right?
7.
Were they moving?
Of course they were moving. They were writhing
Did
slowly.
you wear gloves? They didn't have gloves in those days.
We did. Of course they did.
They weren't disposable, I guess.
No, they were not, but they were rubber gloves and everybody had them on. Huh. Why? Because we didn't know what species it was. Why is that important?
You're going to tell us.
I sure will.
Next time. Stay tuned.
Wait a minute. This is all the time I get?
No.
This is not fair.
We're going to do a lot more today, but...
I'm going to leave the audience hanging by a thread?
Yeah, because we want them to come back. Otherwise, they won't.
Of course they'll come back.
So then you...
I didn't even get a chance to read my story.
You're going to read your story. Don't worry.
Oh, there's no time for it now, I don't think.
How long will it take you to read it?
It's 19 pages worth of story, but it's a good story. You'll like this story.
All right. Well, we'll figure out something. Maybe we can...
It's on another TWiP. We'll do a story time. Story time.
Okay.
So let's get back to this tapeworm here, though, because what we've got here is a classic example of host-parasite relationships involving a definitive host, an intermediate host, and multiple stages of the same animal.
Okay.
We've got an egg, we've got an adult, we've got a larva, we've got a juvenile, all genetically identical. It's remarkable developmental biology. Remarkable. People have studied the segments themselves for their ability to transport amino acids and simple sugars and that sort of thing. And they do that wonderfully, by the way. And so that they've worked out a whole bunch of ways of looking at this. And then once you've studied that, you can identify inhibitors of those processes. And in fact, one of the drugs does inhibit the ATPase of the organism, which helps it maintain the integrity. Actually, it doesn't even help it maintain the integrity. What it does is it produces an antitrypsin factor. And it destroys your ability to destroy it. But if you inhibit the ATP ACE, you can't generate ATP-driven energy systems that interact with trypsin to inhibit it.
Dick, we left out something here.
Uh-oh.
You eat contaminated beef.
Yes.
What happens?
That's funny you should ask.
You're eating a juvenile, right?
That's funny you should ask, because there was a scientist named Küchenmeister. Now, Küchenmeister was a German, and he asked the same question. So how do you think he found out? I'm serious. This is something he actually did.
Probably ate some contaminated beef.
No, he wouldn't do that. He's not that stupid.
I don't know what he did.
He needed a volunteer. Unquotes.
He's got a prisoner?
What kind of prisoner?
Death row?
A condemned prisoner. And so what did he do you think?
Did he ask the prisoner if he or she would eat this meat? No, he just slipped him contaminated beef.
No, he asked him to participate in the experiment.
I see.
And so what he did was he went to the local butcher and he obtained some, in this case it was pork rather than beef, but it's the same kind of life cycle. And I'll get to the difference in a later episode, I think. And he took this measly pork, as it's called, measly pork, because when you look at it, it's just chock-a-block full of these little cysticercosis.
Okay.
And he said to the prisoner, he said, you know, in a couple of weeks from now, you're going to die. That's too bad. I'm sorry for you. But how would you like to go down in history as a medical example of proving what happens after you eat the cysticercosis? And the prisoner said, well, that sounds like a noble end to my life, considering that I haven't had such a noble life. I'm making up the conversation, but it went something like that. And so this prisoner was a volunteer in this experiment. And so what Küchenmeister did was he fed him portions of measly pork every single day for 2 weeks before he died.
To get different stages, eh?
Wow. That's exactly what he found.
And then when he was executed, he
exactly
dissected the body.
And he found tiny little scolices and the neck region and then some segments.
Where, in the intestine?
In the small intestine. That's correct.
So it grew.
It did. Now, he's lucky. What this also tells you is that if there's competition for that gut tract, that the competition occurs after the worm gets to a certain size. Because otherwise, Küchenmeister wouldn't have discovered all of this, right? You'd only have one.
Right.
And instead, he had a whole bunch. And he could line them up. This is day 1, this is day 2, day 3, just based on size. He was just guessing, of course, but it was a nice, logical guess. But wasn't that a clever experiment for someone to do, though?
Yeah, well, I think he was morbid to think of that kind of experiment.
It was a grisly experiment.
It's grisly, yes.
It's like the Tales of the Crypt from a Parasite perspective. But we use that.
None of them had grown very large, right?
No, of course not, in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Okay.
It takes months for these things to grow.
So we go from a juvenile, it implants into your intestine. Does it have little hooks?
Suckers. No. If you go back another page, you'll see that the adult of Teenia saginata only has 4 suckers. 4 suckers.
So what
it's
does
a Cyclophylline.
Cysticercosis?
That has hooks.
Oh, see, so the cysticercosis are released from the meat in your stomach.
That's right.
And then they
evert. The suckers attach, and the neck region starts to grow, and the next thing you know, you've got a 30-foot long.
It's just another example of all the stages that are triggered by the environmental cues. Amazing.
Absolutely right. And it's totally attuned to your gut tract.
It's really not different from a virus infection.
No.
The virus encounters the cell, it binds.
You know what?
It's taken up, it
Vince,
uncoats.
You got it. So there's a general unifying principle that's at work here, and that is that everything has its place. And every niche has its description of what it takes in order to establish in that particular place. And so this parasite is host specific. It's specific for the cow and it's specific for the human.
Okay.
That's interesting.
And then we have pig, human.
Now, let's go to the next one. No, in
pigs.
other words, the cow might suffer from this, by the way, because it does get into brain tissue and eye tissue and things like this, and in heart tissue also. So the cow could suffer
The cow, the intermediate host, could suffer.
from a disease called cysticercosis. That's the name of the disease.
Wait a minute.
I know, you've probably heard about this.
Neurocysticercosis.
Was on House.
That's right, it was on House.
They've used that disease a lot in their descriptions of various neurologic disorders because you have to throw that into the differential diagnosis, right? But you can't get neurocysticercosis from Teenia saginata. It doesn't occur. The cow can get it, but the human can't.
And when you eat it, it goes to your intestine and makes a
That's
worm,
it.
right?
That's it. If you eat the eggs of Teenia saginata,
They pass through.
why?
They don't get the right cues. They
Thank
don't
you.
get the ruminant cues.
You got it now.
Rumen
Like I
cues.
learned 7 different ways the Baltimore system for viral genomes to arrange themselves.
Yeah, what are those 7 different?
I
Just
wouldn't
kidding.
dare tell you. Not in public. I can get 5 of them, but I keep
All right.
forgetting the other 2.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so now we've got Teeniosolium, which is the look-alike parasite to Teenia saginata. The adult tapeworm lives in the gut tract of humans.
Okay.
The juvenile stage lives in the muscle tissue and other tissues of the pig. Pig now, not
Okay.
beef, pig. Now, tell me what the difference between a pig and a cow is.
I think our
I mean, there must be a zillion differences.
there are a lot of
But if you just compare their
the
digestive
system. Pig just has one stomach. It more resembles humans, doesn't
not
it?
just more resembles. The fact is that if you took a human digestive tract and a pig digestive tract and put them side by side and took sections from each of those parts of the pathologist couldn't tell them apart. There's no way to distinguish them. So that means that we are very similar to pigs. Our physiology, I know this is pretty disappointing for our listeners to hear, but when you say pigging out, you're not just talking about a behavior pattern, you're also talking about your own gut tract, because your gut tract and the gut tract of a pig are identical, even when the egg of Teeniosolium, which is the adult tapeworm that lives in our gut tract, when the egg of that parasite encounters the gut tract of a pig or a human, it can't tell them apart.
Well, does it make worms in pigs then?
It makes cysticerci in pigs.
But not worms. But how does it know what
No,
to
that's
do?
a worm. That's a juvenile
That's a
worm.
juvenile. But it doesn't make the long tapeworm in the pig. Why not?
Well, because
if you're telling me that the digestive tracts are nearly identical.
that's a great question. That's a fantastic question, because I can answer it this way, and I'll give you the answer. The answer is that the adult tapeworm can tell the difference. The juvenile tapeworm can tell the difference, but the larval tapeworm can't. So the juvenile is what you eat to get your adult tapeworm.
Mm-hmm.
If the pig ate some more pork,
It would get a worm.
it would not get the worm. It would not get the
Wouldn't
worm.
get a tapeworm in the intestine?
No, it won't get it. So at that fine distinction, the adult tapeworm of Teeniosolium can tell the difference between your gut tract and the pig's. But if you're the hexacanth larva, you can't. Now, what's the medical ramification for that one?
Pork tapeworm. Is that more serious than
It can
cow?
be. It can be fatal.
Really? Why is that? Because
when you ingest the eggs,
it doesn't only go to the gut.
When you ingest the eggs of the adult tapeworm,
Yes.
when you ingest the eggs, the larva inside the egg is stimulated to hatch.
In contrast to the cow eggs.
That's correct, because it doesn't have the well-developed nervous system of the adult to tell the difference.
Right. So those eggs, when they hatch, can go to any place, get in your circulation, and they can go to any organ, including your brain.
And your eye, and your cheek muscles, and your
So this is very different from the cow.
It's totally different. Now,
And that's why you had to be careful in the lab to make sure it wasn't a pork tapeworm?
Here. So when we injected it, it looked like a beef tapeworm.
Right.
But when we looked at the Scolex,
yes, Scolex is very different.
It certainly is. It has 4 suckers, but it also has it's called a rostellum of hooks.
So you saw that on all of this lady's tapeworms?
We did.
So they were pork tapeworms.
The head looked like pork tapeworms. The segments looked like beef
Was it
tapeworms.
recombinant?
We don't know. We never saw it again. We've never heard of it. We wrote it up. No one ever encountered it again.
It's published?
Yeah.
Dickson Despommier.
No, I didn't get on that paper.
Who would be the lead author? Brown?
Yeah.
I'll go look it up.
Dr. Hussey and Kathleen.
Hussey, okay.
Kathleen Hussey and Harold W. Brown. We published it, and apparently that species of tapeworm has never been encountered by humans since then. That's an unusual
Where
finding.
was the woman?
The woman she lived in the United States, and she was a tourist, and when she traveled, she said, I only eat raw meat. I trust it.
Do you know where she traveled?
Yeah, Turkey.
Okay.
All throughout Turkey.
So on house, they often have neurocysticercosis?
They do, as a diagnosis. That's correct. They do.
How often is this encountered in the U.S.?
More than you think.
Really?
Yeah, because it's easier for people to contaminate the environment of a pig than it is for them to contaminate the environment of a cow.
Cow.
Because pigs are peridomestic, meaning that you can live with your pigs. They can actually live in your same house.
So give me an infection scenario. You eat pork that's raw.
Or undercooked.
You get the cysticerci.
You do.
Which go and hatch, and then they make a tapeworm in your gut.
Yes.
And then those tapeworms shed eggs.
Correct.
Which you then get on your fingers.
Yes.
And you get them in your mouth, and then those hatch and go in your circulation.
Correct.
So you're contaminating yourself. Is that the obligatory step?
That is not the obligatory step. I mean, if I had an adult tapeworm of Teeniosolium, I could contaminate your environment.
Me, yeah, other
so,
people.
Has that ever happened? All the time. In fact, once.
Example.
I'll give you the best example I know, and that is Ocean Parkway is a very large, wide boulevard in Brooklyn, as you might know.
Mm-hmm.
And if you drive down this boulevard, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a beautiful place. It's got lots of expensive homes along it. And there's a region of that part of Brooklyn in which the Sephardic Jews have established residencies. And many of them are importer, exporter type people. And the epidemic that I'm about to describe happened among that community. The epidemic involved 7 different families living in 7 different locations along Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn, all of whom were Sephardic Jews, meaning they were strict observers of Jewish law, meaning that you can't eat pork. It's against the law. And yet, they all had cysticercosis in their neurologic tissues, and we had a little girl, an older woman, a young man, an old man, 7 different people living in 7 different families, all with this remarkable and devastating disease.
Why is it devastating?
Because it could kill you.
When it gets in your brain or any other
Yeah, if it gets into a sensitive part of your brain that controls autonomic nervous system functions, you can die from this. But usually it just creates neurologic defects, a space-filling lesion that looks like cancer.
It looks like cancer.
It looks like cancer, and so you have to differentiate it from a mesothelioma and things like this, right? So,
where did they get it? From the imported meat?
Yeah, where did they get it?
I thought they didn't eat it. How could they get it?
Exactly right, Vince. Now you're the EIS officer from CDC.
No,
there are 7.
Now we're House.
Okay, let's be House. House sends his House staff out to do the investigation. And so what happens is they start to ask these questions about lifestyles. Mm-hmm. Maybe they lied. Maybe they do eat pork. Maybe one of them has an adult tapeworm. So they did a complete examination of every person in the families and found no tapeworms in any of the family members.
No tapeworms in their intestines. Okay.
None.
Got it.
And they were, as the word is, nonplussed.
Nonplussed.
They had no clue as to where to go next, except House, sitting in his transparent office playing with his oversized softball, looking at his guitar, and now he plays the organ too, by the way, and he's a fantastic musician, by the way. Hugh Laurie is a great musician. So they're playing now into that mode. I just saw him. He got a brand new Hammond B3 organ, and he was
really?
He was playing "Trip the Lights Fantastic," which is a great song anyway, sung by Annie Lennox, not popularized by her, but certainly covered by her. And this is his last episode. I love House because he's a comical character, totally medically inappropriate, as everyone knows, but they love him because of his curmudgeon-y behavior.
Yeah,
House,
if you were like him, you couldn't be.
House would say, no, I couldn't be like that. House would say something like, go back and look again. There's got to be something there that tells us where this is coming from.
Yeah,
Did you look at everybody in the household? And they said yes. And he said, everybody. And then one person said, well, actually, we didn't look at everybody. Oh, you didn't look at everybody, but I told you to look at everybody. How can you know this unless you look at everybody? So who didn't they look at? Vince?
I don't know.
Foreman, tell them who they didn't look at. They didn't look at the housemaids.
Ah, the maids who are not Jewish, right?
And
They
not only were they not Jewish, they didn't speak much English.
Hmm.
What did they speak?
Russian?
Spanish.
Spanish? Ooh, Russian.
They were, in fact, all of the housemaids from these 7 outbreak households were from the same little town in Mexico.
And they're shedding eggs.
Because they had an adult tapeworm.
And they would contaminate their hands and handle the food of the house. Is that it? Or
Bingo.
Or utensils or something?
Everything. They took care of the kids. They did the housework. This woman was so good that the word soon got out that does she have a sister? Does she have a cousin?
Yeah.
Does she have a... And the answer was yes, 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 yes. And they were all terrific except that they all had adult tapeworms. Now, when they came in and did the examination of the housemaids, or the domestic technicians, as we shall be kind enough to call them, and they looked for eggs under their fingernails, and they looked for eggs between their toes, and they looked for eggs...
Not between their fingers.
Between their fingers, the webs of the fingers, under their armpits. In other words, they looked over every part of their body and found the eggs.
Everywhere?
Everywhere.
Okay.
And yet none of those housemaids were suffering from neurocysticercosis. In fact, none of them had it.
They had an adult tapeworm.
They had an adult tapeworm, but they also had immunity as the result of exposure to antigens in the gravid proglottids, which prevented the penetration of the hexacanth larvae when they would swallow eggs accidentally.
It's a mean of competition, right?
Correct.
Interesting. Manipulating the host to compete.
This is exactly right. But the point is
That's neat.
that all of these people acquired their tapeworms from accidental contaminations.
So here, Dr. Despommier, in episode 1 of the first season of House, it's called Pilot.
Yes.
Shortly after the start of class, kindergarten teacher Rebecca Adler becomes dysphasic and falls to the floor and starts seizing.
Sounds like perhaps a dying cysticercosis in her brain.
On House's insistence, neurologists break into Adler's house to find anything that might account for her symptoms.
Right.
Seizures, dysphasia. What is dysphasia?
Means that their face can't change expressions.
And airway constriction. They find an open package of sliced ham, which is not kosher, in the kitchen. Yeah,
that's not a hint, by the way. That just means
House concludes that she is suffering from cysticercosis due to eating undercooked pork. The tapeworm inside of her reproduced, and its larvae were absorbed into her bloodstream, infesting her brain.
Now, what's wrong with that?
I can tell you that's wrong. I can tell you.
You see, once a little knowledge is a powerful thing, yes?
I mean, first of all...
They didn't have to go that far with it. They could have
The only way she would get it is by eating eggs, which are not going to be in the pork meat.
This is correct.
What's in the meat are different.
That's right.
And if you eat those, you get a worm, right?
That's correct. You're right.
Dr. Despommier, you should be consulting for...
Well, I am consulting for another television show, which, if you'll allow me to mention it, I will, but otherwise you won't.
Sure.
It's called Monsters Inside Me, and it's a Discovery Channel show, and I'm
it's great.
Science advisor for that show. So,
do you talk to them, or do they never
They email me scenarios, and then I go through and check for facts.
Nice. I'd like that job.
It's fun.
So, finally... House is ready to dismiss the case when Chase, I don't know who Chase is.
Chase is the guy who speaks with an Australian accent.
Provides an idea for non-invasive evidence of Adler's tapeworm infection by taking an x-ray of her leg. House proves that she's infested with tapeworms and her condition is treatable.
That part's right. I mean, if you do the long limbs and look for calcified cysts, and you can actually feel these things if you actually palpate deep enough into the flesh.
So then they give her medication to kill the tapeworms.
And what medication did they give?
They didn't say here.
Yeah, well.
What would they give?
Albendazole, and it wasn't available when that episode came out.
By the way, this episode came out, season 1, which is November 2004.
They might have had albendazole. Yeah, I think albendazole was out by then.
But
that's a wrong parasite life cycle.
This is incorrect. Now, let me tell you one more story, very briefly.
Yes.
This takes place in New Jersey. House?
Princeton.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I don't watch it.
It's filmed in Princeton.
I listened to a podcast on the TWiP network called Net at Night. And recently they had a young lady host who had a grand mal seizure. And they thought she either had a tumor or neurocysticercosis. And one of the physicians decided it was brain.
Yeah.
And they gave her a drug, which I
Albendazole.
presume is that, and she's much better now.
Yeah. So how do they actually tell the difference?
She doesn't say.
But I can. I know exactly how to tell the difference between a tumor and neurocysticercosis.
How do you tell? Let's see.
Fortunately, there's an immunological test that you can perform. You can do one of two things. You can either check for antibodies against a certain group of antigens that are group specific for Teeniosolium, and that was developed by Anna Flisser and her group down in Mexico, because there's a ton of this stuff down there. That's, by the way, where the Tapeworm Genome Project is located as well. And this is the tapeworm that they're trying to sequence, because it does cause a lot of human health problems. Or you can look for antigen. Let's say that this is floating around. I'll give you a really extreme example of this. Let's say one of these little hexacanth larvae migrates into your brain and then makes it into one of the ventricles. You have 4 ventricles in your brain.
Right.
If it gets into the last ventricle before the foramen magnum, and this thing starts to grow before it passes into the spinal column, you can actually plug up the foramen magnum. What would happen, do you think?
Well, then you wouldn't have circulation of CSF. It would swell.
Right. And you'd get hydrocephaly.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually you'd start to get headaches.
Right.
And lots of symptoms associated with this. If the pressure really built up large enough, it could actually push this little stage down into the spinal column, where wherever it's stuck, it would block neurotransmission. And you could get neural deficit in that region, like, for instance, at the cervical region or the thoracic region of the spinal column. The point of this is that the juvenile rather, secretes antigens into the CSF. If you remove the CSF and do an antigen capture test, you can find out whether that's the cause of it or not. So you can do an antibody test or an antigen capture test using ELISA technology and know whether or not the patient is suffering from cysticercosis or mesothelioma without having to biopsy. There's a third tapeworm that you have to think about here. That's unfortunate, but there's a third tapeworm. It's the dog tapeworm. In this case, that tapeworm does infect the dog as an adult. It's also called hydatid disease. We'll get to it. We're going to cover tapeworms until there's nothing left to talk about.
I just want to finish up on this young lady, how they knew that it was either a tumor or a neurocysticercosis. Maybe they did this.
You can do the serologic test and find out.
She went to a highly specialized ID doc.
Yep.
And gave her albendazole, prednisone.
Prednisone, why?
To cut the swelling in the brain.
When the parasite dies, here's the deal about neurocysticercosis caused by larval stages or juvenile stages, in this case, of Teeniosolium. The worm only grows to the size of, let's say, a little bigger than a pistachio nut.
It's quite large for your brain, though.
It is, but you know what? I've seen pictures, CAT scans of brains that have like 20 of these.
Really?
And the patient didn't even know it.
Wow.
Until what? Until they started to die.
Then you have...
Now, but wait a second.
Yes.
Why don't you get swelling before that? It's because these worms secrete anti-inflammatory.
They're suppressing the inflammatory response.
They are.
Right. And as soon as they die, they don't.
It's remarkable.
You have an inflammatory response.
It's remarkable. Which then causes swelling.
You know the 4 main signs of inflammation?
I do.
Heat, swelling.
Rubor,
calor, tumor. That's right. Exactly.
Exactly.
Very nice.
Exactly. See, so we do share a lot of information.
Well, this young lady said, if the parasite in my brain that manifested into the tumors that gave me epilepsy is truly dead, then I am lucky, but the scar tissue will remain. But it looked like a tumor, but it didn't manifest it into tumors, right? It's not a tumor.
It doesn't metastasize.
No. You may confuse the two, but...
Yeah.
So she may be fine on the drug, right?
Yeah. And what happens is that if you give steroids, a lot of times they just give steroids. They don't want to kill this parasite because if they do, it'll cause swelling. So they give you steroids and wait till the parasite dies of natural causes. And at that point, your body calcifies it.
What does the albendazole do? Is that an antiparasitic drug?
It is. It depolymerizes microtubules of invertebrates.
In the parasite. So what is the incidence of neurocysticercosis in the United States?
It's low, but it's high in some regions of the world, and those people migrate to this country.
So she had been abroad a year, so that probably...
I'll tell you, the endemic centers for cysticercosis and neurocysticercosis are Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and all of Central America and Mexico.
So if you're there, you have to be careful. It's not just about eating.
Not that. Those people make it to this country, and then they develop it, and so they're admitted to hospital centers like ours.
Right.
We have a specialty unit that specializes in neurocysticercosis.
Here at Columbia.
We do, right here.
And Josh Stillman is a specialist in that.
Right, he's emergency med.
Okay,
so
but he knows how to recognize it.
Yeah, right? But what would bring you to the hospital? A seizure.
Yeah.
All right, which then leads me to my pick of the year. I've already picked this book, though. It's called...
Well, before you do that, can I ask you, other forms of cysticercosis, not neuro, not threatening, not life-threatening?
Depends if it gets in your heart.
All right. And then one last question. So if you go to a country where it's endemic,
yes,
you have to be careful because everything
How can you be careful?
Well, yeah, everything is... so the
Tell me how to be
forks in a
careful.
restaurant can be contaminated.
Every
by the
waiter
guy.
can have it.
Yeah. So what do you do, Dickson? Not travel, right?
You dodge bullets.
I'm not going anywhere anymore.
No, I think...
you were just in Argentina.
I was there. Argentina's fine.
It's clean.
Chile is fine. Yeah.
I'm sorry. We're going to talk about the dog tapeworm next time?
We can talk about that if you'd like.
Because
I'd rather read my story.
Okay, next time?
Yeah.
Now or next time? What do you want to do?
Now. No, I can't. I don't have time to read it.
Right,
unless you want to record this for part 2.
We can read your story and talk about dogs next week or no?
Sure.
All right. You had a pick of the week?
Pick of the week is Peter Hotez's editorial comments in this week's Science magazine.
Let's see here. Pick of the week. Hotez.
Yep, he's a colleague of mine, a good friend, a co-author on this book. He's now the distinguished professor of tropical medicine and microbiology at Georgetown University, and he's the head of the Vaccine Center.
So he's your co-author on this book?
He is.
Do you think he would enjoy TWiP?
He would love to be on TWiP.
Do you think he would think it's a good idea?
I think he would think it's a fabulous idea.
Peace through vaccine diplomacy. That's the name of the article.
That's the name of it. Yeah, it is.
And this is about...
He mixes and matches.
Oh, he looks like an interesting fellow.
Oh, he's a very nice guy.
This is him?
He's a pediatrician.
Like he does. He's got a bow tie on. He has to be a pediatrician.
He's lovely. He's a great person. He's a wonderful man and very knowledgeable.
How old is he?
Younger than I am.
He looks very young.
Nah, he's in his middle 50s, I think.
Can vaccinations help to resolve conflicts and nurture diplomacy? Later this month, Indonesia, the world's most populous Islamic country, will host U.S. President Obama, a visit that could establish important scientific ties between the U.S. and Indonesia and implement a potentially powerful piece of vaccine diplomacy.
See that? And he talks about polio. That's your favorite subject. He talks about leishmaniasis.
Wow.
He mentions the great neglected diseases because he's a champion of those.
Up to 1/2 of the world's neglected tropical diseases occur in Islamic countries.
Correct.
Wow.
He's also the editor-in-chief for PLOS, the Great Neglected Diseases Journal.
Yeah, sure. You know, I think we should email him and tell him about TWiP. And
I
then
can
say,
call him. I have his telephone
and then
number.
say, would you join us?
Peter, we do it by Skype, or we can just do it by telephone like we did some
we
others.
can either way.
He
Nice.
he knows more about hookworm than anyone else in the whole world.
So
And
maybe he could do
He
a
got his degree at
hookworm.
Rockefeller.
Cool.
And he knew Norman Stoll also.
We should do a hookworm episode
Oh.
with him.
Done. He'll
great.
love to do that.
All right, Dickson. Would you like to read a few emails?
Sure.
Because we can do it in a few more minutes.
Go ahead.
Well, we have an email from Jesse. Says,
Jesse.
I love the podcasts on TWiP. You both make the material fun and interesting to listen to, so keep up the good work. I have a question for Dr. Despommier.
Uh-oh.
What is the story of how you decided to name the larva inside skeletal muscle nurse cells?
Okay. So if you go to the biological literature, you can find that word being used as a small n nurse cell in the ovary. For instance, there are cells that actually nurture the ovum as it develops, and it's called a nurse cell. What does it do? It supplies nutrients for the cell and keeps it alive and harbors it and keeps it safe.
Okay.
So the same principle applies to the surrounding tissue that this parasite genetically reprograms to become its house. It's a multicellular portion of cytoplasm that the parasite is culled from a very long striated skeletal muscle cell. And so as this it became apparent that it was still alive and that the parasite actually indirectly induces a circulation from the host that actually provides nutrients and allows waste products to be carried away. The concept of nursing this parasite from a larva to an infectious unit occurred to me, and that's basically where I came up with the name. But then I searched the literature and found these small n nurse cells, so I used a capital.
To distinguish it.
Yeah.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Good.
That's my answer.
Rachel writes, so Rachel is a molecular biology PhD student at Carnegie Mellon.
That's a great school.
I love TWiP so far.
It's a great school. I love your school also, by the way.
She says so far.
Well, we've only done 5 of them.
Yeah, but that implies that maybe she won't love
She's
it.
going to hold reservation for number 430.
When I was listening to the second episode, particularly about how widely spread many of the parasites are, I could not help but wonder how genetically discrete the populations are. Are the organisms fairly near identical, or can regional sources be identified by polymorphisms? Can we tell if someone got scabies working at the neighborhood daycare versus on a trip out of the country? How similar are the malaria parasites in the Mediterranean to those in Africa? If there is variation,
Fabulous question.
Does it correlate to severity of infection or proficiency of a drug? Keep up the good work.
That's a great question. I'll give you the best answer I know because it's been the best studied. And that's on the island of Irian Jaya, Papua New Guinea, Irian Jaya. It's a combination of 2 different countries on the same island, right? The characteristic of that island is that I have to answer this question with another question, and then I'll answer the question. How many spoken languages are there on the planet?
It's a veritable Tower of Babel, Dick.
It is. The estimated number are
300?
3,000 different spoken languages. 3,000 different spoken languages.
We have 100 right here in New York.
That's right. Many of them, less than half, but more than a quarter of them are found in Papua New Guinea, Irian Jaya.
Wow.
Right. Now, why is that? So if you could put the island on its edge and do a cross-section of the island, what you would find is that it's a series of very large mountain peaks and very deep valleys. Okay? So in each valley, you have a different tribe.
They can't mix.
And they can't because they can't go across these very tall mountains.
Yeah.
And so they've developed their own language. There are 800 different spoken languages on Papua New Guinea that if Valley 1 spoke with Valley 2, they couldn't understand each other. So they have another language called Pidgin, which they all speak. They can all talk in Pidgin, but at home they speak their own dialect.
Right.
Now, how many different strains of malaria do you think there are?
How many different?
Genetic different strains.
As many as
Plasmodium falciparum is the species.
Yeah.
And there's a different strain of malaria in each of those valleys.
Sure.
So that's a partial answer to the question. If you look at trichomonas, which is a very widespread sexually transmitted disease, and primarily of women, but men transmit it, so males get it, but they don't suffer from it. You can find many, many different strains of the same parasite throughout the world. The same is true for Cryptosporidium, which is a parasite that infects animals and humans. In fact, you can find a genetic strain of anything. Trichinella, for instance, there are 8 different species. But if you just took Trichinella spiralis, that one species, and asked how different are they from place to place, the answer would come back, they're very similar. They're extremely similar. Let's relate this to another show we have, TWiP, and go to the West Nile virus. There are 23 different strains of the West Nile virus, and the biggest difference is, I think it's like 210 base pairs different, something like this, and the smallest difference is like 23 base pairs different, to make sure that we're not just making sequence errors when we do this, right? So the answer is that the moment you become geographically isolated, you become towards developing into a new species. And in Papua New Guinea, you've got these deep valleys that have separated the parasites.
So do they have any relationship with disease severity or drug susceptibility?
No, because the general characteristics, or the drug severity, and by the way, this raises a question about vaccines.
Yeah.
Because if you were to vaccinate against Plasmodium falciparum from, let's say, East Africa, which is a big region, so let's just make it Kenya, all right? that vaccine would be applicable to probably the strains located within a 1,000-mile circle.
But not on the island.
Outside of that, you go to West Africa, you've got another strain that you
Yeah.
have to deal with, and the vaccine doesn't work against that one. And so you've got these big problems.
Cool.
The answer is find some generic characteristic of all malarias, not strain differences, but species specific.
Okay.
And then work on that stuff.
All right. Now we have
Another question.
Let's do two more.
Sure.
I have it from a listener called Fog Dog. He sent an article in the New York Times which suggests that a cancer in Tasmanian devils may be a consequence of a parasite. Did you read this?
No.
So
I thought it was a flesh-eating virus. I thought
Tasmanian devil, you know what that is?
Yeah, of course.
Marsupial Tasmania.
I've actually seen them in the wild.
It's been heading towards extinction because it has a facial cancer.
That's right.
What they think is that originally they thought it was a viral cancer.
Yes.
But now it looks like
it's... I haven't read this article, so I don't know the answer.
Well, they think that the tumors are spreading, that they are infectious on their own. They're calling them, this physician says, it's somehow a new organism. I think of it as a parasite. This is incorrect.
I need to see more data.
They found the cancer cells from different animals share distinctive genetic markers not found in the animals themselves. I don't know of any infectious cancer. I mean, he's using a parasite to describe its characteristic, but I don't think there's any evidence that it's a parasite.
He means
anyway,
parasitic, but
parasitic
not a parasite.
Maybe, but we'll put the link in for people to have a look.
Yeah.
Thanks, Fog Dog.
Hey.
Gil writes, gentlemen, as a long-time listener of TWiP, I find your way of disseminating information enlightening and captivating. So when TWiP came, I found it was nothing less than the same. I find the information fascinating and inspiring. When I don't know what a term means or want more in-depth explanations, I learn more by seeking the answers formulated by the subject matter presented. I look forward to your podcast on sushi, as I enjoy it on occasion and hope you will expound on what can be found in the average garden that we eat out of. We did talk about sushi last time.
Yeah, we mentioned it.
This is an old meal. Using organic matter, I can just imagine the environment that can sustain parasitic organisms. I use cow and horse manure and occasionally chicken as well. I let the dressings overwinter, but have on occasion used fresh in the flower garden, which is separate from the veggies, and hope you will touch on this way they can get into the food chain as well as the individuals that work the soil for sustenance and pleasure. I hope that TWiP will be as popular as TWiV and will come out weekly as there is great want or thirst for this type of knowledge. Thanks for all your efforts. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I don't know of any parasites that we could catch from chicken droppings, right?
Yeah, cow manure we talked about today, right?
Cow manure, we didn't talk about the manure. We talked about the flesh.
Yeah, the manure, right. There's nothing in the manure. Isn't there a worm?
E. coli 0157, I would say. That's my biggest worry.
So manure is not an issue.
The cow parasites that they have in their intestinal tracts that give off eggs are usually species specific.
It wouldn't infect us.
Right. In fact, I once received a telephone call, believe it or not, Vince, when I was a graduate student at Notre Dame, from Don Amici, the actor.
He's an actor, yes.
He is, and he had cows on this pasture.
Right.
And he wanted to know whether it was okay to put horses on the pasture after the cows had been there, as to whether or not the cows had left parasite stages for the horses to catch.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I didn't know the answer, so I went to the veterinary literature and I looked up cow parasites and horse parasites, and there are very few common parasites among those two groups, even though they're both ruminants. So nature tends nature tends to do this. I can think of some exceptions with regards to not higher mammals, but dogs and cats.
Mm-hmm.
They do transmit parasites that we can catch, but cattle, no.
Okay.
Because cow manure is good fertilizer, and we've been using it for years all over the place, including all throughout Pennsylvania with the Amish, and they don't transmit parasites.
Well, you would know. So
well,
I'll take your word.
I depend on the kindness of strangers, as it were. In this case, veterinary parasitology, and I knew a whole bunch of them up at Cornell University in New York State. So if you're listening up at Cornell, thank you very much for imparting this little bit of information in my head.
Don writes, I'm writing only because you promised that an enthusiastic audience would encourage you to provide more frequent episodes. Parasitology was voted the favorite class at my medical school, UCSF, year after year, and you two are truly worthy to carry on a great tradition. Well, as you said earlier, Dickson, here it's always the most popular class.
We've enjoyed that for many, many years, too. Because I think it's the subject that sells it, by the way. It's not necessarily who teaches it.
That's why Monsters Inside Us is so popular.
Absolutely.
Your format, presentation, and depth of knowledge is superlative. I encourage you to provide more frequent episodes, Don. P.S. Otherwise, you might have to rename the series This Month in Parasitism, which would be TWiP, substantially harder to pronounce.
Good point. Let's try to make this a weekly occurrence.
Angelica writes, my name is Angelica, and I'm a longtime listener of TWiV. I have also really enjoyed TWiP so far. There's another
so far. Qualified success.
And I'm looking forward to future episodes. I'd like to point out one small error I noticed in the most recent episode about Tracaniello, the Jungle, the 1906 novel whose repulsive description of slaughterhouse conditions influenced public opinion about meat safety was written by journalist Upton Sinclair and not Sinclair Lewis.
No, you're quite right. You're quite right.
Thank you.
Sinclair Lewis wrote about oil. That's absolutely correct. And I get them mixed up, and I'm dyslexic. What can I tell you?
Thank you both for the entertaining and informative podcast, and keep up the good work. So let's do one more parasite from Tasmania.
Ooh.
This is from Dick. Actually, we're going to do two because they're two from Australia, and one is really short.
Which is obviously where that Tasmanian devil problem exists, so let's go.
Peter writes, I write this in order to stimulate TWiP into producing more episodes for my consumption and thus nourish my intellect. In return, I offer you nothing.
But your attention.
Yeah, Peter
if
from
you listen,
Sydney.
We will talk.
It's Peter from Sydney, Australia.
Okay, Peter.
And then David from Tasmania writes, Thanks for your podcast. It's fascinating and best of all, accessible to the layperson with an interest in parasites such as myself. I first became interested a couple of years ago when I read Carl Zimmer's Parasite Rex.
Right. In fact, I was an advisor to that book, too.
Which is a great introduction to the subject.
Yep.
I tend to reread it every couple of years.
Oh, my.
We'll make that another pick today. You've
Absolutely.
got the science article.
Yep.
I'll pick
Parasite
Carl
Rex.
Zimmer's Parasite Rex.
Carl's a good friend, and he's a wonderful writer, and I totally agree with the pick.
Carl's coming on TWiV,
Wonderful. I like it.
Now, I have a question. How would you classify a species that spends only part of its life cycle as a parasite, but is not parasitic in adult form? I'm thinking here of some of the parasitic wasps, for instance. Would such a species be considered a parasite?
Well, I think in the strictest sense, its larva is a parasite because the egg is injected inside of its host and allowed to actually consume the host from within. You might even think of it as an internal predator. And so you're right. The classification of parasite at that point becomes ambiguous. And it's the strictest term. I mean, you could also say that same thing about ticks and fleas and black flies and mosquitoes. They come in and they parasitize you by taking a portion of you that they can't make themselves. But they're temporary, okay? So they're actually predatory. And they take a little part of you. They predate a little part of you and take it back with them.
So you wouldn't call them a parasite. They have a parasitic lifestyle.
They do.
And temporary.
Okay. They do. They're dependent upon your biology for their existence. And in that strictest definition, you'd say they were parasitic, but not a parasite.
All right.
Like lawyers, no, that's not true.
No political discussion.
No, that's not a political discussion.
That will do it for another TWiP, Dickson.
This was a lot of fun.
Gentlemen.
And
ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry we went over today.
Interested listeners.
I'm sorry we went so long, but we haven't recorded a TWiP since December, and here it is March 17th, so we had a lot to say.
It's tough to get everything in.
You know what we should do next time? You should read your story.
I'm going to do that because it's another parasite that's a tapeworm that causes huge medical problems, but there's an environmental.
All right, we'll read that and then do a little bit of something else and wrap it up there. Okay.
Sure, we'll finish up the tapeworms.
Want to do that next week?
Yep.
Your game, eh?
Let's have a TWiP every week.
And a TWiP?
I think we should TWiP every week.
Yes?
No. It's just a matter of finding the time, that's all.
Of course, you're a busy guy.
Well, we all are.
If you're a new listener to TWiP, please subscribe to it in iTunes or Zune. And that way it keeps us on the front page of the iTunes store so we get more listeners. The more listeners... Dick, why is it good the more listeners we have? Because we want to teach as many people as possible.
Exactly.
And...
we love teaching.
We love teaching, and the bigger the audience, the more the interactivity.
That's right.
So
it's a shame we can't put the audience in touch with each other.
Well, they can at the website. They can leave comments and interact
They
with
could
each
start
other.
blogs.
Tell your friends if you like TWiP, microbeworld.org/TWiP. And write a review in iTunes. That also helps. There's a lot of good ones there, and that keeps us near the front page.
Yep.
As always, send us your questions and comments.
And corrections.
No problem. TWiP@twiv.tv. Dickson Despommier, thank you for
Vincenzo.
coming by and
It's
doing
my
it. It's
pleasure.
such a nice warm day here in New York.
Gorgeous
in the
outside
60s.
right now. It's
Beautiful.
beautiful. It
Blue
is.
skies
Yeah.
and no parasites.
Well, not yet.
That's not true.
I would say today the Culex pipiens are coming out of the sewers and laden with West Nile virus. How's that? Just thinking about what's happening today
Yeah, the
out
season
there.
is beginning, isn't
It's going
it?
to start.
Last year was a mild one.
It was.
Perhaps this year will be greater.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to us. We appreciate it. And, of course, what have you been listening to? This Week in Parasitism, which is all about eukaryotic parasites. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back again soon. Another TWiP is parasitic.